Hi, I'm poet and writer Kaye Spivey, and today I want to talk to you about compiling a poetry collection. So there's two main schools of thought when you go about compiling a poetry collection. One is taking all of the poetry that you've written in the past year or 2 years or past month, as it may be, depending upon kind of how quickly you're writing and how the ideas are coming. Taking poetry that you have just written organically and compiling it all together and figuring out a theme that goes with it based upon the poems that you have already written. The second way is to write poetry with the intention of the poems going together in a collection. Now this way is a lot more like noveling. I think a lot of people have a better mindset for this, and I think a lot of poets for their second, third, fourth, fifth collection do it in this way. First poetry collections are going to be compiled based on the poetry you've written before. Usually you get to a point in your writing where you're like, you know what? I have written hundreds of poems, there's a whole bunch that I like, I want to put them together in a book and I want to be able to share it with people. When you come about it from this perspective, as opposed to writing all the poems to go together, there's going to be a lot more paring down to do. For one thing, because these poems have been collected over a period of time, your style may have changed. You may have been writing a little bit more free verse at one point, you might be writing a little more style now. That's not a bad thing at all. Don't let people tell you that like all of your poems have to follow one format or something like that, or that you need to have a distinct format that's just you, where you only write in 3-line verses or something like that. Like, I've read collections like that and they do get boring. It does become repetitive. It can be done well. There are a lot of poets who do write in a similar fashion. There are a lot of poets who come up with a style that's all their own. I'll use myself as an example because in college there was a person in one of my poetry classes who finally pointed out that I like to tie the beginning and ending together. I tend to have a strong image at the beginning, we'll work through something slightly different in the middle, and then at the end I always tie back to the beginning. And that's just something that I do because it's something that I enjoy in other poetry that I read. And so a lot of my poems are going to have a beginning and ending stanza that are very, very similar. Not the same, but usually same subject matter, oftentimes same number of lines in the stanza. However, because it's not a hard and fast rule, I have plenty of poems that are all one stanza. I have plenty that are broken down into like 3-line stanzas. It kind of depends upon how the poem goes, and I feel like that is very important for an individual poem to not be caged into a box. Now, there is of course a lot of good in doing form poetry. However, the poem and the form need to mix. They need to agree with each other. They need to both be doing something important to the poem. The same thing with your poetry. If you're writing in a certain way, it should be benefiting the poems rather than that you're just trying to fit it all in because you want all the poems to look the same. Like, that's not what your focus should be when it comes to poetry. Yes, it looks nice if all of the poems look nice, but if they read poorly, poetry can be doing more than that. Poetry should convey something with words, which is why you're doing a poem. The words should be saying something also, and the words really should be most of the focus, especially if you're doing a collection. There are other styles, there's other arguments for it being more of an art form, but I think because of what poetry is, the language you use, the words you use, the sentence structure, all of that is important to the poem. So don't get caught up in how the poem should look, get caught up in how the poem comes together as a whole. Now back to what I was saying about compiling. Because you're going to write a lot of different poems in the span of however long you'd like to compile. Let's say for the sake of this that these are poems you've compiled over a year. So in the year you're going to write a lot of different styles of poetry, a lot of different lengths of poetry, a lot of different subject matter and all of that. And so what you really need to do is sit down and look critically at everything that you've written for the past year, see if there is an overlying theme, see if half of your poems have to do with the rain, half your poems have to do with some kind of particular political matter, half your poems have to do with your best friend, all of your poems are about cats. Like, there should be some kind of overarching theme, and there are going to be poems that don't go with the collection. And let me tell you, most of the time, your very favorite poem, the best poem that you wrote the entire year, the one that's like, oh, your standing ovation poem, is not going to be the one that goes with all the other poems. And so you do have to kind of kill your darlings with this. Just because that poem is the best poem you will ever write in your life, which it could be, doesn't mean it belongs in the collection. And do not try to force a collection around just a single poem unless you're willing to then write new poems for the collection to go with that poem, which then gets us into the other style. But let's stick with the compilation. You're going to have to kill some darlings. Some of the poems that you really like aren't going to go. You're also going to have to look really strongly at which poems fit within the same voice, the same tone. You're going to have to get an idea of what you've written and whether or not you're going to have sections. If maybe half your poems have a really kind of an angry, like, oh, we need change, like go and fight kind of tone to them, and half of the others are like, but the world is lovely and sunshine and flowers. If there's only about 40 of each and you're trying to do a full-length collection, you can do 2 separate sections, or you can find a way to meld them together. You're going to have to come up with how you want the book to flow, because it does need to flow. You need to not simply alphabetize all of your poems and then stick them together. That is not going to make a good collection. What's going to make a really good collection is figuring out some kind of overarching theme. It doesn't have to be that you're telling a story. It doesn't have to be beginning to end. It doesn't have to be this was January, this is December. It's going to be more effective if you find a way that like this poem flows to this poem and the story kind of develops along the way, but the poems all link together. There's going to be tonal quality. And when I do this, I think about radio hosts who do the music. A good radio host is going to be able to tell this song has this beats per minute, this song has this beats per minute, and they have this tone, and so they're going to sound really good next to each other. So I can play this song after this song, and that it's going to flow nicely together. It's the same kind of thing. You're going to kind of have to use your inner ear when you're putting the poems together. And you're going to want to link subject matter. So this is going to be a whole lot of things, but when you're first compiling it, keep that in the back of your mind. Make sure that every poem that you pull for the collection is going to be something that is your best work. And you probably want to go through them all. You're going to probably want to take maybe 100 poems and really look critically at all of them, go through red ink, do another revision of every single poem before you start compiling them together, to make sure that you have your absolute best poems. That some of the poems aren't like, I want it to be in here but it needs work. Those poems aren't ready. You can work and get them ready, but they're not just, you know, off the bat ready. Whereas there's going to be some other poems that you're like, I didn't even need to touch this. I did a good job on it. I've worked hard on this poem. That poem can just go in. Once all the poems are at that place, then you can start shuffling through and figuring out. But you do need to have a little bit of an idea in the back of your mind so that you know which ones to kill off, to keep out of the collection, because they're just not working with what all the other ones are doing. So if you're doing it the second method, where you're writing the poems to go with the collection, this is going to be even stronger towards that idea of keeping in mind how you want the story of the book to go. And it is often easier to make a really strong story arc when you're writing the poems to go together. So in this method, you're going to have some kind of theme. It could be a theme of some people. It could be a theme of, I want to write about politics, I want to write about mental illness, I want to write about abuse. It has some kind of overarching theme, and then each poem is going to be kind of plotted out, and you're probably going to outline the way that you would if you're doing a novel. You're going to have an idea of about how many poems you need to write, keeping in mind that some of the poems you write are not going to be as good and are going to need to get cut. So you're going to have to overwrite. You're going to have to probably write around 100 poems to make sure that you have some solid poetry at the end that you definitely want to use. And you're going to have to make sure that the poems are all following a theme, but not get stuck into the idea that all of these poems need to like absolutely follow the same theme, because then you get stuck into that making patterns within the structure. It's more important to have the poems sound good, and some people are just going to be better at this than others. If you're not the type of person who can kind of go in and visualize like what I want the structure of this poetry book to look like, taking the time to write the poems more organically and then figure out how to link them together more like puzzle pieces rather than like an outline, it's probably going to work better for you. It works better for me. I prefer to write the poetry and then start to collect, and I will write more poems to go into the book as I start to get an idea of what I want the book to look like, as I've been compiling through the year or 2 years, usually 2 years for me, And so you can use a little bit of both things. You don't have to get stuck into one thing. If you are writing poetry for the collection specifically, but you have a couple poems that you know would go in it really well and that you love, you can fit those in as well. There's no like hard and fast rule. There's just kind of two basic methods. Once you have kind of got the poems that you want and you've edited through them, you kind of have them in an order that you prefer, that you think you like, and you've read through that and it sounds good to you, make sure that at this point you hand it off to somebody else to read through for you. I think I'm going to do another video to go more into what to do once you've got kind of the compilation together and how to put your poetry book together completely. Probably closer as I get to that with my book. I am, of course, putting together another poetry collection and I am beginning to compile. I'm doing a little bit of a combination of the two methods because this is going to be my second full-length poetry book. I have some poems that I want to use. A lot of them have more of a deserty theme because I was living in Death Valley for a little while, and all of those poems I worked really hard on, and I think I can have at least an entire deserty section. And I'm writing some more poems to kind of fit in with that, and I'm looking at the overall structure of kind of what the poems I've written so far have been like to try and get a complete collection together. So I'm working on that step right now. If you have any questions about putting together that kind of step, leave them down below and I'll try and help you out. Or if you have any suggestions for other people about how you compile poetry, leave that down below and we'll kind of just start a discussion on that. And I'll talk more about what you do once you've got the poems together that you want. I know I touched on it briefly, but I'll go more in depth as I'm getting to that step also. Yeah, hopefully that was helpful. And like I said, leave any questions that you have down below and hit the like if you like this video and you would like to see the next step in the poetry collection putting together process. And that's all for today. I will see you in the next video and good luck to all of us. Bye!